What is going on, YouTube? So coming back today with my next conference preview. Earlier today I did the Big 12, and right now I will be doing the Pac-12. And one of the more intriguing conferences to talk about for the 2016 college football season. So obviously two conferences. I'm not gonna compare each record. Again, that's for more of the individual team previews, but I'm going to go ahead and talk about the Pac-12 South and where I think teams will finish up there. So go ahead and start with my number 6, who I think is going to finish number 6 in the Pac-12, and that's the University of Colorado. So it was a rough season last year for Colorado, and I think it's going to be more the same this year. They were, I believe, the second to worst team in the Pac-12. And again, they have a pretty tough schedule again this year. They have to go to Michigan out of conference, and then they land Stanford, USC, Oregon, all on the road. So, and then they also have to go to the north. Actually, I don't remember. No, I don't think they play every single team in the north. No, they probably miss like 2. But anyway, they do have, I mean, they got some tough games. There's no way around that. This is a team that you're probably looking at winning, I'd say 2 to 3 games this year. Colorado State's winnable, obviously Idaho State. Oregon State's a winnable game, and then might be able to snag one more upset. This is a team coming off, again, a rough season last year with a 4-9 season. They started out the season pretty well, 3-1, and then also got one in-conference victory. But anyway, this is a team that was looking to bring in Davis Webb by transfer from Texas Tech. He ended up going to Cal. That was a big loss for them. I believe Cade Apsay is their starting quarterback now. And then not that many things in the way of weapons on offense. Shea Fields is a good receiver. Philip Lindsay will probably be starting for them at running back, but again, a pretty thin roster. So at number 5 inside the Pac-12 South, I've got the Arizona State Sun Devils. A team that coming into last year was talked about as a Pac-12 South title contender and a Pac-12 title contender as a whole. Again, another team that is just looking at a pretty, I wouldn't say miserable 2016, but they're right talent-wise right now. I believe they are the 5th best team inside the Pac-12 South. A few things that concern me for Arizona State is just their lack of returning talent. No idea who's going to be a quarterback for them. You're just looking up and down their roster, it's hard to find really any sort of consistency from last year. They lose DJ Foster, they lose Mike Bercovici, which are going to be some big losses. Looking at Kalen Ballage at running back, Demario Richard is a guy returning for his junior season that I think will be good. And then Tim White, it looks like, is there. Tim White and Ellis Jefferson are really their only receivers coming back that I think are going to be solid receivers. Again, not looking great for them, and we'll see if Todd Kelly can put together a great team. He's a good head coach, and again, they're going to need it. So at number 4, I've got the team last year that looked like they could be a team of destiny, and that was the Utah Utes. So still a 10-win season. In 2015, they had a pretty loaded roster offensively, and it seemed like this was the first time that Travis Wilson found any sort of consistency in his career. And this is a team that loses really their most valuable piece to the team, and that is Devontae Booker. He was one of the best running backs in college football in 2015, and it's obviously going to be hard to replace him. Probably Joseph Williams will be assigned with that task, but they lose Travis Wilson, and I still think they might have a little bit of the magic left from last year. They do have a rather friendly schedule when you break it down. Now, here's the thing with Utah is, again, with the schedule they have, I mean, they draw Oregon, Washington, Arizona, USC, BYU, all at home. BYU is a very winnable game. They do draw, like, San Jose State on the road. And then they also do get UCLA on the road as well. But this is a team that has the ability to win 7 or 8 games this year. Like I said, it's a friendly schedule. I think they'll definitely be a bowl team. So at number 3 inside the Pac-12 South, I have the Arizona Wildcats. So, again, a team coming off an extremely disappointing 2015. I believe they came off a bowl victory in the Gildan, New Mexico Bowl against, I believe it was New Mexico, because I think New Mexico got the home game there at their own stadium in the bowl game. But this is an Arizona team that returns a lot of players, a lot of talented guys that were part of that team that made the run at a New Year's Six Bowl 2 years ago. A lot of people forget about that, and I think while it was a rough season, they lose kind of their heart and soul on defense. And Scooby Wright, he missed so much time last year that I don't think it's going to hurt them too much. They've had so much experience without him on the defensive end of the ball that I think that, like I said, it won't be too hard to transition without him. This offense is loaded. I mean, they have Anu Solomon coming back for his junior year if he can stay healthy. Nick Wilson, who had a fantastic freshman year again, if he can stay healthy. Tyrell Johnson, one of the fastest receivers in the country. And then this is a team on defense that I think will be fine as well. I mean, I believe their defense returns 6 or 7 starters. So they do have some returning talent. Looking up and down the roster, DeAndre Miller, Luca Bruno. They do have some guys coming back along the defensive line. It should be one of the stronger defensive lines in the Pac-12. Again, I like this team as kind of a rebound team for this year. So at number 2, I've got the USC Trojans. So USC returns, honestly, not a whole lot on the offensive end of the ball, or on the offensive side of things. Again, it's a team that seems to be able to just reload talent. They recruit that well. It's just kind of easy for them. And obviously the toughest thing for USC this year is just their overall schedule. They draw an extremely tough schedule. I believe it's first or second toughest in the country this year. They start out with literally the toughest team, the former national champions, the Alabama Crimson Tide, at AT&T Stadium in Arlington. They draw Stanford on the road, Utah on the road, UCLA on the road, Washington on the road, and then they also have home games against Oregon, Notre Dame, Arizona State. Yeah, so tough schedule for the year. Obviously, if they can clear it, then they are looking at a path to the college football playoffs. But getting through that schedule with 1 or no losses is going to be extremely tough. You look at the probability if they do win the Pac-12 South, then they have then that means that they'll probably beat some combination of Stanford and or Oregon. Then they also have to play that team again. Things do look promising for them on the offensive side of things. They have Ronald Jones coming back, who I've mentioned before in my other videos, who I think will be an absolute stud this year at running back. Max Brown will be the starting quarterback for this year. Former 5-star recruit, should again be a solid option at quarterback. And they do have, in my opinion, the best receiver in the country in Juju Smith-Schuster, so obviously that helps as well. On the defensive side of things, this is a team that returns Amon Marshall, one of the best recruits in the country 2 years ago. Adoree Jackson, obviously, a stud right there. And then some other returning starters in Scott Felix, Chris Hawkins at safety. Should be a pretty stout defense, even though they do lose Sua Cravens on the defensive side of the ball. So get into my number one team in the Pac-12 South, and that is the UCLA Bruins. So UCLA is a team that over the last few years has had a tremendous amount of expectations every single year. They are a team that seems to, I wouldn't say falter, because a lot of the years they still had successful seasons, but they never quite been able to live up to those expectations, in my opinion, kind of like the Georgia of the Pac-12. Again, it's something where you feel like eventually they'll just get past that point, but it also seems like that's a bug that's just going to keep staying around. There were a few confusing moves by some of the UCLA players. Thomas Duarte, who was one of the better wide receiver tight ends. I believe he only stuck to wide receiver at UCLA, but tight end now in the NFL. Declared for the draft when it seemed like he'd come back and have a solid year, but still, Darren Andrews returns. I believe it's Eldridge Massington, another returning receiver that has a little bit of experience. Josh Rosen comes back at quarterback, is, in my opinion, one of the top 10 best quarterbacks in the country. Obviously, they return a great running back in Soso Jamabo. They do lose Paul Perkins, which is going to hurt. But this is a defensive line that returns players in Eddie Vanderdoes, who is going to be an absolute stud in my mind this year. Jayon Brown at linebacker, Randall Goforth at safety. This is a team that has a lot of returning talent on defense. Offensive line is stapled in by Caleb Benenoch. Should be a first-round pick this upcoming year. And again, a team that has enough talent to do it. It's just whether they can put it together. So move into the Pac-12 North and start out with my number 6, and I've got the Oregon State Beavers. So been a rough few years for Oregon State ever since they snagged Gary Anderson over from Wisconsin. In no way do I think that was a bad hire, but also it's just they're in a talented conference and they just haven't been able to put together a decent season in a while. I believe coming off a 2-win season, looking at another year where 2 wins would honestly be good, maybe 3 wins. Looking up and down their schedule, again, a tough draw. They got to go to Minnesota to start the season, winnable game, but again, still a tough team. Team of Minnesota bringing back one of the better quarterbacks in the country in Mitch Leidner. Idaho State, they also get them at home, should be a win there, but then they draw Boise State at home, which is going to be a good Boise State team this year. So you're probably looking at 1 win inside the conference and then 1 win out, unless they're obviously able to come through with some crazy upsets this year. They just really surprise. Now, getting to my number 5 team, and I've got the Cal Golden Bears. Cal team that's going to have a vastly different look this year, obviously, after losing the number 1 pick in Jared Goff and also losing a wide receiver in the caliber of Kenny Lawler. In my opinion, good move by Kenny Lawler to go when he did, just because it might have been a rough transition for him this year, but also I could see this Cal team still having a semi-successful year, maybe still being able to be a bowl team. Now, again, one of the big keys for them is going to be the transition between Davis Webb, who just transferred from Colorado, from Texas Tech, I mentioned that earlier, and also just the overall transition of the turnover they're going to have to face, like I said, losing 2 key players to the level of Jared Goff and Kenny Lawler. Defense has a few returning starters, James Looney, Devontae Wilson. Along the defensive line, I believe they return almost everyone on the defensive line. So defense at least should be a little bit better. Again, it's going to be a tough transition. I'm not 100% sure if Davis Webb will come in and lock up the starting spot immediately. Him and Chase Forrest, the presumed starter before, probably will put up a pretty good fight for the spot. This is a team that has a pretty easy out-of-conference schedule. They draw Texas at home, San Diego State on the road, who's actually a pretty tough team, and then Hawaii. So again, possibility of being a bowl team again this year. So move on to number 4, and I've got the Washington State Huskies. A team that I actually had just outside my top 25. And again, this is where this Pac-12 North starts getting in a little bit of a log jam at the top. Seems like there's a very even sense of talent between Oregon, Washington, and Washington State. Again, a team that brings back one of the best quarterbacks in the country in Luke Falk. It just feels like it's hard to rank out where these teams should go. Washington State doesn't lose a whole lot really anywhere. They return Jamal Morrow, Gerard Wicks at running back. So they do have returning weapons there. They return a lot of weapons at wide receiver. Robert Lewis, I believe River Crowcraft. I'm not 100% sure on that name. But again, it all goes back to Luke Falk and also their biggest wide receiver, or their biggest weapon, a wide receiver, also Gabe Marks. Return a decent amount on the defensive end of the ball, or the defensive side of the ball, so that should help them out as well. So get into my number 3, and I have the Washington Huskies. Again, I mentioned it earlier. It's a logjam right here. A team that returns a lot of talent. Again, another team that returns a good quarterback as well. That you expect, I expect at least 8 wins out of pretty much all these teams. A team coming off a 7-6 season that just seemed like it was a tough transition. Jake Browning coming off his freshman year. Myles Gaskin, a tremendous freshman running back. Honestly, got a decent amount of talent at wide receiver too. They returned I believe it's Braden Linnaeus. Dante Pettis, again, another great wide receiver. And even though they do lose a decent amount on the defensive side of things, they have one of the better safeties coming back in the country in Budda Baker. So, again, should be able to at least have some form of defensive leadership on that team. So, get into number 2, and I've got the Oregon Ducks. Another team with a lot of turnover, a team that had to bring in a graduate transfer quarterback last year in Vernon Adams, and a team that will be doing that again with Dakota Prukop. If Dakota Prukop can come in and be as good and effective as Vernon Adams was at the end of the season last year, then it will be a good year for Oregon. This is a team that still has a lot of talent, did lose a lot, went 9-4 last year, I'm confident enough to say they caught fire at the end of the year last year. They still have one of the best running backs in the country that a lot of people forget in Royce Freeman, and they still do have talent left at wide receiver between Devon Allen and Dwayne Stanford. Again, the defensive side of things, it's going to hurt tremendously that they lose to Forrest Buckner, but they do return a lot in the secondary in the way of Arian Springs, Charles Nelson, Reggie Daniels, and Tyree Robinson. So should be, I wouldn't say a smooth transition in the defensive or in the secondary, because the team was so bad on defense, at least in the secondary at the beginning of the year. It seems like the forever going Ifo Ekpre-Olomu era is finally over, and again, it'll be a struggle for Oregon to find a little bit of defensive leadership. Obviously, a lot of it's up to the offense, and really see if Oregon can be able to, get back to the level they were with Marcus Mariota. They still have the talent level on that team. Looking up and down their schedule, it is a pretty easy out-of-conference draw. The hardest one is going to Nebraska, which is still a very winnable game for them. They do draw UVA at home. Again, winnable game there. And then some tough road trips at USC. They get Stanford at home, at Utah, a team that just absolutely lit them up in Eugene last year, and then also at Washington State, a game that they also lost last year. So, again, a team that could repeat as 9-4, or a team that if they, if Prukop can be consistent the entire season, the defense can improve even a little bit, then this can be a 10-win team. So, at number 1, obviously, now at this point, I have the Stanford Cardinal. A team that doesn't return, honestly, a whole lot. This team that's obviously going to be relying very heavily on their returning Heisman runner-up in Christian McCaffrey. They have a player in Bryce Love backing up Christian McCaffrey that's an absolute stud at running back. This is a team that does have a little bit returning at wide receiver. Dalton Schultz at tight end will be good. Francis Owosu, I believe, will be their best wide receiver. And Keller Christ will probably be their starting quarterback after losing Kevin Hogan. On the defensive side of things, they will be relying very heavily on Solomon Thomas at defensive tackle. And again, a team that does lose a lot on defense as well. Now, obviously, this is going to be a team relying very heavily on the player that just broke the single season all-purpose yardage record. This is also a team that draws some tough out-of-conference games at Notre Dame, against Kansas State. They do get Kansas State at home, but definitely not an easy team to beat. They do get Rice at home, so that one won't be that bad. But they also have to go to UCLA, to Washington, to Arizona, to Oregon. So there's some tough road games there as well. So again, a game that's just, or some games that are going to be tough, but I think Stanford can handle. All right, so that pretty much does it for all my individual previews. So talk a little bit about what I think the Pac-12 championship is going to look like. So again, I had UCLA winning the Pac-12 South, Stanford winning the Pac-12 North. I do think Stanford will win the overall Pac-12. This is a team that won the Pac-12 last year. I think is the favorite coming back this year, and I think we'll be able to secure it. Again, I do have a lot of faith in Keller Christ. I think he can come in and be a good quarterback for Stanford. Kevin Hogan was a quarterback that was good, very, very good this past year. One of the better quarterbacks in the country, and one of the more efficient ones too. But again, a player that took a long time to develop. So get into the end of season awards that I did in the Big 12 video, in the Big 12 preview, which the awards are Offensive Player of the Year, Defensive Player of the Year, Newcomer, Coach of the Year, Dark Horse, and Disappointment. Not really awards at the end, those are just some separate things. But anyway, I do think the Pac-12 Offensive Player of the Year will be Christian McCaffrey. Again, it's hard to come up. There's a lot of other players that will be in the running for this award. Just a few names that pop into my mind. Royce Freeman from Oregon, Luke Falk from Washington State, Jake Browning from Washington, Ronald Jones from USC, Josh Rosen, UCLA. Like I said, there's a lot of options here. Some dark horses, Nick Wilson and Anu Solomon at Arizona. But again, Christian McCaffrey, it is hard to fault him. It's almost impossible to think that he will not win this award. So Pac-12 Defensive Player of the Year, Adoree Jackson, in my opinion, one of the most versatile players in the Pac-12, also one of the best corners. So Pac-12 Newcomer of the Year, I think, will be Dakota Prukop. Again, it's hard to tell how a player's going to translate from the FCS to FBS, but the fact that Vernon Adams was able to do it, health was obviously an issue for Vernon Adams, and it was a little bit of a slow transition at first. But again, I think this is a Oregon team that has some weapons still on offense that will help out Dakota Prukop. So Pac-12 Coach of the Year, I think, will be David Shaw at Stanford. Again, I think he'll be able to do a good enough job coaching to be able to get Stanford to another Pac-12 championship and maybe a spot in the college football playoff. So dark horse for the Pac-12. There's a lot of options here that I think you could say are dark horses, but I think that Washington State, USC have been hyped up so much and are in a lot of people's top 25, so that's not really a dark horse. I'm going to dig a little bit deeper, and I'm going to go with the Arizona Wildcats. I mentioned them a little bit, and I think the build-up to that has been pretty apparent in this video, but again, I really like what Arizona's being able to bring back. A rough year last year, but they dealt with a lot of injuries. And if they can stay healthy this year, then I think it could be a dangerous team in the Pac-12. Again, one that's just 2 years removed from a New Year's Six Bowl. So I think the biggest disappointment will be USC. It's building up to it. I mean, USC does have a lot of talent, but they always do, and they have I think it's literally the toughest schedule in the country this year. It seems like it's going to be too difficult a road. The Pac-12 is extremely deep this year. There's really no clear favorite to be like a college football playoff contender, like you have in the Big 12 with OU, or you have in the ACC with Florida State and Clemson, or you have in the SEC with Alabama. But again, it's going to be a tough road. Not to say that I think they're a bad team at all. Again, I mentioned with TCU, with the Big 12, that they have a lot of turnover. I just don't know if the transition's going to be smooth. USC, I have no doubt in their talent or their roster, but again, I think it's just that schedule. It's brutal. So that pretty much concludes it. I will be coming back tomorrow with the Big 10. If you have not seen my Big 12 yet, the link to the entire playlist for all my previews will be in the description below. Definitely go check that out. And then also, I've mentioned this before, all the results, everything that I talked about in this video, all the rankings and everything will be in the description below as well. So that's pretty much it. See ya.